welcome to AFP. My name is Devang Desai. I'm joined this week by David Goss. On today's show, we chat a new women's league is finally coming to Canada. We rehash the end of Canada's World Cup run along with our friends, the United States, who exited in the round of 16. We catch up on where things stand after the round of 16, plus CF Montreal making all of the moves, good and bad, depending on where you stand. And we open up the mailbag for another edition of Ask AFP. Holy cow, David. We're missing Sean this week, and we're missing him for a ton of news that has happened, not even World Cup related. I feel like we should start the Women's Soccer League, but I do have a question for you.
Okay.
You talk a lot, sir. You talk a lot, very expertly. Wow, can't talk. And I'm curious, how do you not ever lose your voice? Or like, do you do stuff? Are you doing like a honey routine? Do you put like a hot towel around your throat when you go to sleep? What's the secret?
Nah, the most I do is honey and tea. I drink it pretty regularly. That's about it. But I've gotten close this World Cup not because of the amount of shows and work I've done, but because of the upsets, and I don't really bounce back from screaming very well. Yeah, it's kind of an issue I've always had. So, I've gotten close. Obviously, Japan and Costa Rica almost knocking out Germany, and Spain got me close. Senegal almost got me close against England. I was so angry about that game, and Morocco as well. So that's been the closest I've gotten. Otherwise, I'm able to keep it pretty steady and level, pretty low.
It's impressive. I'll say that. I almost lost my mind when Mexico was almost eliminated via yellow cards, because that to me would have been the beautiful game incarnate. But alas, that didn't happen. And before we get to all the World Cup stuff, plus Canada and the US, the big news coming out of Canada this week, Diana Matheson and Christine Sinclair are the faces of a new Canadian professional women's soccer league that is planning to kick off in 2025. It'll be an 8-team league. Whitecaps FC and Calgary Foothill Soccer Clubs are confirmed as the first two team owners. Great to see an MLS club working in this fashion. The remaining 6 teams will be announced in 2023. Founding sponsors, CIBC, Air Canada, heavyweights in Canada in all regards, which I thought was one of the eye-popping things to me, David. What was your first reaction to this?
Finally. I think that's the big one, right? Is thank goodness. And I think the comments from Sinclair sort of talk about how big a moment this is and how long you've waited. You mentioned those big companies. If you're taking things from like a very business point of view and not the romance side of things, which I think we both sort of live in, like there is no better investment dollar for dollar, pound for pound than in the women's game. Right. Because you look at what's happened for the new NWSL owners. Like you come in at a lower level than the $365 million that Charlotte FC paid to get an MLS for a similar impact, similar eyeballs. And so it makes a ton of sense in Canada. And I think it's hugely positive for the sport. And clearly it was never going to happen if the players didn't push it. And that's the one thing we've talked about over the last few months on now the men's side and the women's side. The players are the ones who are at a level of professionalism and you know, have eyes for greater achievements than what the organization has. And so the players went out and got it done once again.
So it's Matheson and her company, Project 8. Her business partner, Thomas Gilbert, are spearheading this development. There is some talk about NWSL expansion to Canada and some discussion in our Discord about whether that might be the right course of action, maybe similar to the MLS vein and how they started in Canada and then the CPL came along. There's some discussion about that. I thought Dan H made a really good point in our Discord, David, about seeing the CPL success and possibly pivoting from the initial enthusiasm about having some NWSL teams in Canada. I think using the US as a model is also an interesting factor. I'm curious what you think. I think the idea of having one Canadian international in each of these teams is really ambitious and interesting. If you were going to go about this, are you comfortable with going it alone at this juncture?
I think so, because I think the structural roots that exist already with the CPL and the 3 MLS clubs gives you enough that you're not starting from scratch, right? There are, Halifax has a ticketing service and fan outreach already and a stadium and like all these things that you can tap into, and you're not trying to recreate. Obviously, you want some parts of it to be original and unique, but you have to have that starting infrastructure. And that's where on the men's side, it didn't exist in Canada. So you leaned on MLS, where now I think it exists to a pretty high extent in Canada. So you can probably go it alone if you want to. Quite honestly, I think my answer would sort of probably be a mix again of if Toronto and Montreal and Vancouver can get NWSL teams to do that while also still having a Canadian only league, because you want the most amount of players to get opportunity. But I agree with you that to have sort of big names and stars to start this out is big. And that's what the NWSL started as. If anyone remembers, the NWSL started when the Canadian, Mexican, and US soccer federations came together. They helped fund the league. By doing so, they paid the salary of one international player from each of those countries to distribute across each of the teams. And that gave you this sort of like league appointed DP straight on the roster who would be a face that you could market early on. I think you're probably already past some of that of like, oh, do people know soccer? Will people come out? Like, they'll come out if the product's good. But I do think that this league can be really successful on its own.
And I think it's interesting. I mean, the Whitecaps have a long road back to credibility based on what's happened with the organization in the past, but some of the recent moves, including hiring Steph Labe, and now this, I wonder if I might put some pressure on CF Montreal and Toronto FC to get in the game and try and jockey for a team of their own, or like you said, David, maybe up their efforts in terms of how they're helping grow the women's game, because I think some questions will be asked of them by their supporters when they see news like this and don't see their clubs named or involved at this moment. So the pressure, it's good pressure. I think what you said off the top about finally, it's fascinating to me that the players simply said, we have to do it for ourselves. Like, that's just basically what happened here. Diana Matheson and Christy Sinclair's like, okay, a couple of years ago when they were sitting down to plan this out, they didn't see the powers that be maybe helping them broker this deal without them driving this. And I think that's so powerful. I think since he's saying, quote, as a player that still plays on the national team, I've been waiting my entire career for even just the opportunity or the chance or the choice to play at home. I think as national team players, that's all we've ever wanted. That hits home, David. That hits home. And after just watching Canada play in a World Cup and have the spotlight on them like that, I find it also a powerful juxtaposition of this women's league starting on the heels of that, and once again the women leading the way.
And in reality, 2015 was the time to do this, right? You hosted a World Cup. Off the back of that, or into that, was when you should have built your own league to keep yourself competitive or ahead of the rest of the world. And Canada has relied on the NCAA setup as well as a lot of the infrastructure in the US, and just having flashes in the pan, right? Having world-class players come through on their own because they've pushed their own careers. But it's good to see that this is happening, because this will keep Canada competitive, right? There's no guarantee, as good as some of these young players are, that when Sinclair is done, that Canada will produce another, right? And so this is how you remain competitive, and this is how you remain a part of the global game as everyone else is building up. Like, the women's game is moving faster than the men's game. And you have France and England, we've talked about this on the club side, investing more and more money and creating more and more competitive players, and then more players globally going and playing in those leagues. This is how Canada remains a part of that. And it's similar in the US. The NWSL is kind of one of the reasons, alongside the NCAA, that the US continues to be able to compete at a high level. And I think this is going to push Canada into another sphere.
women's games are nearly selling out the Emirates for Arsenal these days. The team is very popular. The players are popular. I'm just anecdotally talking about them because I probably watch them the most in Europe, David, and it's very true. And even then, when they go to the Champions League, they're kind of minnows. Like they get bossed around, which I think is fascinating to me as the resources kind of battles play out in this sphere, as people are kind of finally cluing into what you said as well off the top about bang for your buck and getting really something out of your investment. So fantastic news. We're obviously going to cover this in depth as we move forward off this announcement and get into the nitty gritty of the league and how it will work. Also in Canada, the CF Montreal exodus continues. This time the coach is gone. Long rumored Wilfred Nancy officially joining the Columbus Crew to become their new head coach. Saw the CF Montreal release. I thought it was okay. You could tell there were some hurt feelings there, and obviously the rumors regarding a bust-up with Saputo and Nancy didn't help things, David, but the players are one thing, and they're making a pretty dollar. The coach leaving, bringing his whole staff with him, definitely sends a bit of a different message, I think.
And this was the shoe we've been waiting to drop to assess what could CF Montreal's ability to compete next year be. Because you can talk all you want about players, but with Nancy leaving, it's a redo. You're starting at ground zero now, and we didn't know if he'd leave. It felt pretty safe, and clearly the rumors were strong because it sounds like he was basically being shopped around the league by his agent at times during this season. That's how much he wanted to leave, and good on Columbus for having their ear to the ground there and knowing there was an option out there past Caleb Porter. And I think this team's going to be good on the Columbus side. But for Montreal now, listen, there are other teams we've had this conversation with. They probably hit their ceiling last year if they're owned by this person, right? You've reached the point now where the way the club is built, spending, and now the personality that he has, getting rid of maybe your best asset in Wilfred Nancy to elevate your talent above what you spend. I as a Knicks fan and every other sports fan, I get it. I don't know how you outplay your owner at some point.
Dolan vibes, strong Dolan vibes. If you want to buy futures on a player, Jason Russell Rowe.
Yeah.
Do that right now. Do that right now as he gets a new manager in Columbus with Wilf Nancy. That'll be fascinating. Quickly.
And by the way, Aiden Morris, Sean Zawadzki, like all of the young center mids or all of the young players on Columbus who have talent, who are looking at Ismail Kone and Kamal Miller and Alistair Johnson, they've got to be so excited.
It's exciting. Tim Bezbachenko does it again. Shouts to Bez. Finally, quickly, Matt Hedges is doing the Celebrity FA Tour. He was in Toronto. The Leafs gave him a jersey, and he put it on, which led everyone to surmise that he is definitely signing with TFC. But it appears he has some other suitors, David. He's 32. Let's say you're Matt Hedges. Is Toronto the good place for you? Is he the Drew Moore? Is he Drew Moore 2.0 basically at this point?
I don't think TFC's built the way that team was, where it's as simple, but I think if you're Matt Hedges and you're leaving Dallas, you want that big city, big club experience, and I think TFC would offer him that. So I think from a lifestyle point of view, this is a next step, and if Bob Bradley says that you fit his system and he wants you, then it feels like it could be a pretty fun experience for him.
Some injury concerns, sort of, and I guess the age profile is not that ideal, but I don't know. After watching the defense last year, I'm willing to do anything, basically anything, to solidify what I saw back there. And MLS experience bodes well on the day cleaner when signs with Minnesota. I feel like, shouts to the old heads, the plus 30 guys, they still obviously have a role to play. So bring Matt Hedges to his sort of home, as he's from Rochester. That's like 2 hours away, right? I don't know if he was a Sabres fan growing up, but putting on the Leafs jersey as someone from that area is pretty bold, in my opinion.
He grew up in Indiana. Like, he went to high school in Indiana. He went to Butler at first for college. I don't know how Western New York he is, but I've never asked.
Okay. Well, when we get him on the show, we will. All right. That is a quick tour of the latest news in the soccer world. Before we get to the World Cup, a reminder, we've partnered with Sports Interaction to have some fun during this incredible, crazy, zany, dumb, illegal tournament. We've left the prop bets behind, though, and for the first time, we're looking at who the favorites as outright winners are. No surprises here, DG. Brazil topping France, England, Argentina, Portugal, basically on the same playing field here. Seems about right. I don't know if you have any qualms with the fact that maybe the Dutch aren't listed here, but Brazil as the clear favorite is okay in my books, but I'm waiting for some spectacular collapse still.
I don't have an issue with the Dutch because I think the two favorites are Brazil and Argentina. So if the Dutch are able to get through both of those teams and then win a final, they are as big an underdog as this is setting them as, and I would be fairly shocked. On the money here, Argentina feels like a good bet because, again, I think they have every capability of doing it. And also Portugal. Obviously, I'm excited about Morocco, but like for Portugal, you're going to get an England or France that just battered each other. You've got an opportunity against a Morocco team that's not a part of the world elite coming into this one, just came off 120 minutes. And it feels like Fernando Santos has finally made the call. So those two feel like the best bets to me.
The call being playing his best players, right? That's the call you were talking about?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. If I was going to rank them, I think I'd put England a bit higher. I mean, they're pretty high as it is, but I might put England as 2. Sounds controversial, but I go Brazil, England, France, Argentina, Portugal. It's coming home, David. It sickens me, but I think it might be coming home.
I think they're going to lose in the quarterfinals to France.
Ooh! Okay, and I only said that for the reverse jinx and because Sean's not here. On the dark horse side, Morocco, obviously less of a dark horse than Croatia, though. Interesting.
Well, I would assume it leans on Brazil, Argentina being on their side of the bracket to have to get through, True. Right? And then I would, because Portugal obviously are the last of these favorites, so that's who Morocco face in the next round. It also felt, with Modric and Kovacic coming off in extra time for the last game, it felt like there's a little different than 2018.
These guys look cooked. They looked a bit cooked, but they know how to play tournament ball. I wouldn't be surprised if that game against Brazil gets to penalties somehow, some bizarre way how, but we've seen it before from them. All right, finally game lines, outrights, props, and more at Sports Interaction, Canada's sportsbook. That's bit.ly/soda podcast, bit.ly/soda podcast to join now. Reminder, you got to be 19 plus, and please make sure to play responsibly. When we come back, a final, at least for now, wrap up of Canada's World Cup run, plus we talk USA and the rest of the World Cup coming up next on AFP. Welcome back to AFP. Well, David, if you're looking at the rest of the tournament as a way to gauge how Canada really did at the World Cup, 2 teams in the quarterfinal were in their group, and the other team was Belgium. This really was the group of death, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Just our luck.
Yeah, and that's sort of one of the things I've been rehashing with people over the last few days is just a lot of the World Cup reality is your draw and just who you face and when you face them. And, you know, do you get the big team in game 1 when they haven't locked in yet? Do you get them in game 3, like we saw with Tunisia and South Korea when they've rotated their squad because they've already won? Do you get an African side in Morocco with established stars who are ready to win? Or do you get a team like Cameroon that sort of backed into the World Cup and is still figuring themselves out? And yeah, that seems to be a major part of what happened to Canada. I think there's a little, I don't want to say regret, Devang, but you watch Croatia struggle to score and teams stick in games, and you do wonder about the calls that were made for that one match.
Big time. I'm watching Croatia now, and I have the utmost respect for them and their footballing history, and the fact that they are a squad full of incredibly skilled technical grinders. Like, you don't really get that combo that often, I feel like, of extremely talented players who also seemingly bust their butt at all times and for the cause in such a spirited, cohesive way. But they only really scored against Canada so far. I know they scored against Japan as well, and it was a really nice goal from Perisic, but we kind of made them look like Man City. And it goes back to maybe being a bit naive with the setup and John Herdman really not adjusting much when I'm watching all of these other managers really go into their bag. And I think, again, it must be stressed about the depth Canada has or maybe doesn't have, and John Herdman not being able to employ all of these things that the other managers have done so far. But I do have a lot of regret about those games, and I think I'm replaying a lot of these situations in my head and wondering what could have been different. But to look at Morocco specifically and look at maybe the way Morocco is discussed in our country, at least, David, in Canada, I don't fault people for maybe being like, okay, it's Canada, it's Croatia, Belgium, like, holy crap, we're screwed. But Morocco, we could beat them. I don't truly fault them for that if they're not following soccer that closely. But one look at this lineup and one look at the group of players they have, what an impressive outfit. Like, I thought the self-inflicted mistakes obviously doomed Canada, but the organization, the coordination of everything they did together, it was a sight to behold in that first half.
I mean, I got to take a little bit of a victory lap on that one, because I did say a few months ago, remember, where I was like, we're all saying it this way, but all of the things Canada have that are good or great, Morocco has them plus some. But yeah, I agree with you. I think one of the things when I look at this Morocco team is you really, outside of Hakimi, who's the best right back in the world, and your captain, every player on the field for their games in this World Cup has been between the age of 25 and 31. So you also have a team in their prime. And the thing that I see with this team is the intensity with which they go after teams when they go, right? They're well structured, as you said, they're well coordinated. They know how they want to defend, but when they trap you in press or when they win the ball in transition, they go at 110. They don't lose the tackles. You can physically, I think, feel them affect their opponents in the game. And then they're very direct and intelligent about the way they attack. So they just have fit together seamlessly over the course of this, and they have complete commitment to what they do well.
If I am a certain manager in North London whose team is at the top of the table, I'm asking my technical director if Sofiane Amrabat could be had for a transfer. 26 years old, playing for Fiorentina. They don't got that much cash, right? What a player. Holy cow. What a destroyer. All the flashy stuff, like the skill guys they have, for sure are impressive. And seeing Ziyech reborn and given a new lease on national team life, it's really cool. And especially in the round of 16 match against Spain. But
also,
that midfield is
can
really
I say
impressive.
this? This is one of the things that sucks about the global game right now, and I don't know how to fix it. But like, Ziyech is fun, and when he was on Ajax, he was fun, and then he went to Chelsea, and he hasn't been fun, and he doesn't play, and it's just sometimes it's that simple. Dusan Tadic, miserable time at Southampton, then he goes to Ajax, and he's elite, and he's fun to watch. It's just, there are a lot of good players. There has to be a better way to have them allocated across teams, but still make the money they deserve to make. I don't know how to fix that. But yeah, sorry. That was one of the things that popped in my head.
No, it's totally warranted. And it's not surprised Chelsea killed the fun. I mean, let's be honest here.
They always do.
Looking at
Salah, De Bruyne, and Lukaku.
Seriously, it's wild. It's wild. Looking at Canada though in this game and looking at trying to salvage something from a really rough Croatia match. They come out with a couple of changes. The big ones in the midfield, Marc-Anthony Kaye, Jonathan Osorio getting the starts, Sam Adekugbe drawing back in. Really unfortunate mistake from Milan Borjan. I totally was on board with having him have a better feeling exiting this World Cup by having him play this game and maybe not going with Dave St. Clair, but I obviously immediately regretted that upon the game starting. It was such a downer and such an obvious sign to things to come in that first half, because Nesri was flying. talk about it. Boufal is just a fascinating player. Like it's boom or bust, but I feel with the national team, it's often boom. It's way more boom than bust. And against a backline that we've seen have quite a few problems against a less speedy Croatian side, it was a bit of a disaster in that first half.
Yeah, it was. And I think Vitoria's partially at blame on the Borjan mistake as well. And I was one that
the
thought
back pass was poor.
Yeah, and I thought Dane St. Clair deserved the opportunity. I thought there were a few other pieces I would have pushed in to the team. I don't have we heard, was Jonathan David hurt?
He played. He came on as a sub, so
right. So he was fine to start. I understand giving recognition to people who have worked so hard. I think a lot of people deserve stuff, but I don't know that Junior Hoylett needed to start another game at this World Cup.
Didn't make any sense. Didn't make any sense.
I thought that was a bit of a mistake. Otherwise, in general, I thought Canada played pretty well. I mean, you have the massive mistake, so Ziyech puts you ahead early. Otherwise, I thought Canada moved the ball pretty well. I thought they got into some dangerous areas. I'll never forgive John Herdman for stealing Fonzie versus Hakimi from us by swapping his wings, but it was probably the right thing to do.
Fonzie played, again, 6,000 positions in this match.
Yeah, true.
And I will say that Canada looking way better in the second half might have been a product as well as Morocco really not needing to do anything and really knowing the state of the game. And that all said, I thought the second half was really promising, and I thought that Junior Hoylett played quite well in that second half as well. But I was glad that they mustered a pushback because at halftime, the conversation, at least in my neck of the woods, was very grim, and not talking at all about the positives and the steps you've taken, but talking about disasters and embarrassments. And finally realizing that Morocco is really damn good at soccer. It was a combination of all of them. So seeing a pushback, getting the own goal just before halftime, fortuitous, yes, but very welcome at that point. And then the second half, like I said, I think Morocco took their foot off the gas, content with the score, and Canada did well. They played well. They acquitted themselves well. And I was proud of them for ending their tournament.
They should have scored.
Yes. Yeah. Atiba not getting that header.
Injustice.
Between that and the Oso miss.
Yeah.
That and the Oso miss against against Croatia. I'll be replaying those in my nightmares. But it was great to see Atiba get that chance and come in. And I think we were wondering between ourselves, David, why didn't we use him like that the rest of the games, huh?
Yeah, it was, like you said, getting that taste out of their mouth. Like, he got the opportunity to play his game and play well at the World Cup level. I don't have an answer for that. There were mistakes made, clearly. And as I said, when you watch Croatia now, I think it's even more stark. But at least I would agree that everyone who tuned in saw, I think, the team we've gotten to know over the last 2 years. And I think that's a positive to at least get to end on that.
I thought it was cool that Fonzie played the whole match. Tejan played the whole match. Tejan, the player of Canada's tournament. And we'll talk about where he could be going off the back of that. Maybe Italy, which would be really cool. I also getting the start was awesome. I as much as I love Mark Anthony Kaye as the person, I really don't understand him over Kone. But Kone did get in and he used his time well as well. I've been asking some other people this, David, and I'm very curious to see what you think. But if you were to give Canada a letter grade on this World Cup, what would it be?
I think I would say C+, if that's how you guys do it in Canada, by the way. But I could be convinced.
We do.
But I could be convinced even a little higher. What have most people said?
I've heard some D's, D minuses. I heard a couple B's. I think I'd go C, though. C seems right to me.
I can't. So just from my personal point of view, the goals I laid out were accomplished. I think Alphonso Davies is a superstar. I think the team has more resonance. I think there's more hope. I think they scored. I think they played good soccer. I mean, clearly they came out of the Belgium game with coaches saying, other coaches, third parties saying this was the best performance of the first round. So while the results and some parts of it were failure, they had accomplished most of what I put down beforehand. So I can't give them a D or an F. I definitely can't give them an F, right? Like, to me, it was an accomplishment.
Agreed.
The World Cup checked all those lists. And so that's why I think B is probably too high because of the score lines being eliminated before the last game, not getting a point. But that's where I sit right at a C+.
I think I'm just a tougher marker than you because I agree with everything you said. But that all says to me that it's a C. It's not the end of the world by any means. It wasn't the most positive thing either, but there's definitely room to improve and things to build on. And it was, like you said, a World Cup full of moments, which I kind of really, that's all we really wanted. And there were some bad moments more than good, but at least we had the moments. Is what I'll bank on for now. The road forward, Copa America is the big talk. Obviously, it would be good if Canada and America are in this tournament, David. It sounds like this will happen, though. It also sounds like this tournament could be in the States as well.
Yeah, which I think is unfortunate. Like, obviously, I'll love to go see it and, cheer it on and whatever, but it's just what happens in the U.S. is so neutral. It's
not the same. It's not the same.
Now I understand one thing is it's obviously a money decision. The US is probably the easiest to activate it, and you're going to make the most money because of corporate sponsorship as well as ticket sales. And the one thing that is fun is everyone has a home fan base in the US. Outside of like maybe Uruguay. I don't know if Uruguay has a fan base anywhere outside of Uruguay because it's a tiny country and it's far away, but there are massive populations of fans from all of these countries in the US. I went to an Ecuador game this year, and it was one of the best atmospheres I've been in years in New Jersey. So like that part is fun, and I think that part takes away some of the home field advantage for the US, so it does still challenge you. And it would be really cool if this is the convo around 2026 to do it in Mexico, the US, and Canada, right? Get a little bit of that experience in. I'd be shocked if they did that. But the one thing I will point out that I have heard some people talk about is as guest invites for Canada and the US, teams are not required to release their players for Copa America. So teams under FIFA regulations are required to release their players for official competitions, but for regional championships, it's only for the one, I believe, that is your regional championship.
Right.
So for the US and Canada, they can't go to Club Bruges and say, we want Kyle Larin and Tejan Buchanan. Bruges can say no because it's not the Gold Cup. It's the Copa America for the teams out of North America. So it's just something to think about in terms of how meaningful this can be and sort of what it'll look like.
So it would take place June 14th to July 13th. Does that mean MLS clubs could technically say the same thing?
Yes, 100%. And we don't know what Leagues Cup's going to look like, so we don't know what teams will choose to say. It seems like Canada will have more players playing in Europe at that point, as we're about to hit with all of these signings that are about to happen. But that will also mean it's running simultaneous alongside Euros, which means most likely European teams are not going to be in preseason. Yeah. So that's the only sort of saving grace. MLS teams will be allowed to say no. My assumption would be, if you approach teams correctly, teams will want players that they want to put in the shop window at this competition. So my guess would be a lot of the MLS players will be okay because clubs will see it as an opportunity for them to increase their value and then sell them.
Can't wait. And we got a Gold Cup in between. But that's the road forward. I mean, we're going to get into, I'm sure, in the weeks ahead, what the future holds for the team, specifically John Herdman, and how they can build off this trip to the World Cup. As you mentioned, David, a ton of movement already for some of the players on this team. Alistair Johnston confirmed heading to Celtic. Feels like a wonderful fit to me, David. And I look at someone like a Kieran Tierney, who is a graduate of Celtic, and look at Alistair Johnston and can't help but think, though they played on different sides, that there are some similarities in terms of a bulldog who's technically good on the ball, but also can run his bag off. It feels like a really good fit.
Yeah, I agree. I think Alistair Johnston one of the things we've talked about a lot with him is natural born center mid that's now playing out wide on the right or playing as a center back. I think one of his best assets is his physicality alongside his skill. So I think he fits that league where I think he's above average skill level, but can also handle the physicality of it. And when you look at a Celtic team that plays against a lot of bunkers, he's an elite passer in a multitude of different ways. So I think he'll be able to get more experience playing on the front foot, attacking teams. So I like this move as well. And I think for a guy like that coming off the back of a World Cup, you kind of want to make the right move. And this hopefully will be the first in a series of them for him in his career.
Really, really bright person as well. So I feel like the decision-making nucleus that he has probably vetted quite a few options. I feel confident that they are confident that this is the right choice. So that's very exciting. Also exciting, and it's a club record transfer on the outgoing side for Montreal. Ismail Kone to Watford, to the Pozo family-owned club group, because I saw some rumors that he could possibly be heading to Udinese, who they also own in the summer, maybe, David. But this one, I think, is the of this crop the most intriguing, because I don't think any of us have Watford as the final destination for Ismail Kone. This is a transfer way or a waypoint in his really burgeoning career for someone who just started playing pro a few days ago, basically. Feels like a really good fit. And it also gives him this window into wider Europe with a family who has obviously clubs all over the place.
Yeah, it's an interesting one to me. I think you start the conversation on the number, and that, I think Montreal got the right deal. He got the right deal. He is, I think, a superstar in the making. And this number of $8 to $10 million, whatever it ends up being, is in that stratosphere of a Brendan Aronson out of Major League Soccer. It's below an Alphonso Davies. It's below a Gaga Slonina, but it's in that Brendan Aronson, Brian Reynolds, although it shouldn't be, it should be higher, and it is slightly. I'm trying to think of the other names, but it's in that stratosphere of signings of guys who, are still young and improving, but have shown a pretty high level already at the pro ranks. And so I think the number shows the level of respect, which should be there. And so I'm glad to see that. I don't know that England is the best spot for him, even in the championship. I wanted to see him play in a France, Italy, where maybe there's a little more space for him to be on the ball and create the game and do what he does best. But you're going to have to compete at the highest level at some point, because he's that good. And so you might as well learn it here. And obviously the rumors, as you say, connecting him to other clubs makes sense. But I just think maybe it wouldn't be where I would have put him at this age in this moment, but I trust Ismail Kone to be able to assess every situation, fit, and just figure it out, because he's done it already his whole career.
Slaven Bilic is the coach at Watford for now, at least. And that'll be cool. Sort of. He can hang out with João Pedro, who's sick, who's really good. Yeah. So that'll be cool as well. Elsewhere, Joel Waterman getting interest. This is reported by Peter Galindo, who's done some great work in Qatar covering this tournament in a variety of mediums. He's reporting Joel Waterman receiving interest from clubs in Austria, Germany, Turkey, and Greece. Joel Waterman, to me, DG, is Scott Kennedy with a higher ceiling in a good way. And I feel like this all makes sense with all the places that are seeing interest from him.
One of them is Fenerbahce, right?
That's a big club, damn it. That's a big club.
Huge club. Yeah. That's just cool. Sam Arakube doesn't even play at that level, right? And so
yeah, that's right.
I just think it's really cool. He's obviously been a trailblazer for CPL and U Sports and all that type of stuff, and so it's good to see that continue. And I don't know what his ceiling is. I have to see him sort of play, because we haven't seen him with Canada. You haven't gotten to see him play at another level. I thought he looked fine in CCL, so I think he showed sort of at the highest levels he can play, but I definitely would love to see him go to a team that plays a back three, just to make his life easier, at least for the first step into Europe.
Please go to Fenerbahce. That'd be really cool. Good luck to Joel Waterman as he figures out the next steps for himself. And finally,
can I ask you this? If you're Joel Waterman, do you look at things and say, I have to move now because CF Montreal is going to be so bad next year that I may not have the juice to get anywhere else? Like, is this your shot?
I don't know if I'd look at it that way. Maybe I would look at it more like I'm 26 years old. I'm on the fringes really of the Canada roster, even though I was playing for one of the best teams in MLS and playing a pretty substantial role for that club. This is where I sit now. So if I remain much longer, will my role on the national team change? Probably not. Right. So I think this is maybe more about pushing the envelope at 26 to see what else you can get out of this.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I would push back on the national team part and say Vittoria's probably going to retire, right? And now it's Alistair Johnson and Kamal Miller, and you have as much experience as anyone with them. Kennedy's obviously out with that injury for a little while. So I would push back with that, but I think I agree with you. Now, the only thing would be he'll be the man next year, right? Him and if Kamal stays, they are the core of that team. So I don't know. You just as you run us through 3 players leaving after the coach, I think it's time. Yeah.
I'm thinking that I want 30-year-old Joel Waterman to have some just horrific Europa League experiences under his belt when we get to that World Cup, like some terrible away trips with flares and the whole jazz. So yeah, I think that's mainly where I stand with that, but I see your point, and Montreal could use a vanguard back there because Kamal Miller's probably gone too, right? Let's be honest here.
We haven't heard the rumors, so I don't know, but he played well enough.
If they did a good job scrubbing that Croatia tape in the last goal, then we should be seeing the interest pick up. Well, finally, the player of the tournament for Canada, Tajon Buchanan, again from Peter Galindo. I think the original source though was from Belgium. Which makes me less skeptical than I normally am for random internet newspaper rumors, David, because I know this is that time of year for them. But Italy coming calling. Apparently Napoli in the market, Juventus, yikes, don't go there, man. And AC Milan also apparently interested. Napoli seems too perfect for Tajon. That seems like a dream.
Agreed. I think they're the best. I think they've been the best club side in the world over the course of this season, and they play with legitimate wide attacking players. Like, he's going to replace Chucky Lozano. That's what this move would mean for him, and it would be a perfect spot. There's space for him to create. He'd be creating for a guy like Osimhen, who's as good a finisher as there is in the world. It's a club that if they spend on him, that means they're going to use him because they don't have money to burn. But they also have a track record of selling at the right time as well, developing players. Yeah, I agree with you. It would be a home run. Also, like, how cool would that be?
Oh man,
to watch Tajon Buchanan playing for Napoli.
He played so well in Qatar, and I got a lot of really, really cool stories. So from Syracuse to Napoli, that's got to be the movie, right? That's the name.
Yeah,
from the Carrier Dome to Napoli. Fantastic. Anything
from
else?
From Mello to Maradona.
Oh God. Okay. That's Prime worthy. Maybe Apple TV. That's good. Okay. Anything else, David? Anything else Canada wise that was on your mind before we close up?
I don't think so. We're hearing some rumors about a defender out of Vancouver, but all things pretty quiet on that front. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's most of it. And for Canada, I think it was fun. Over the last few weeks, I've had a lot of fun watching the games with a few different people, and chatting with everyone. And I guess my hope is the next time we see them, they, are playing competitive teams and we can get back right into this. And it's not a year of wandering around and playing the Cayman Islands and Bahrain and sort of finding themselves again.
Yeah. Gosh, we'll always have Suriname, my friend. All right, when we come back.
By the way, The Athletic wrote the piece before the Netherlands game about Suriname and how dangerous they could be at the next World Cup and how many players want to play for them. So suck it, Devang.
Anytime I see a source now mention Suriname, I know you've been feeding those lines. So it's all clear. When we come back, the U.S., the Dutch, talk about that game, talk about U.S. soccer, and then, of course, Concacaf, how everyone else fared. Plus, we look back at some horrific predictions and some good ones that we made before the tournament. It's pretty good. Hope you enjoy it. Coming up next. Welcome back to a football podcast. Talked about Canada. We must now cover the United States, who did make it to the round of 16 on the backs of their excellent crop of young players who I think will be causing noise around the world in the years leading up to 2026. There's no doubt about that, David. And I think the analysis of this game, the loss of the Dutch, I completely just skip past the reactionary idiocy, no one understanding what the Dutch are doing or like how good they are and just saying the US blew it. I blew past that and kind of sought out the people that I like reading when it comes to the US and getting their takes. I listened to your show, MLS Today, with your crew and listening to you guys talk about the game. I thought it was really positive. And I don't mean like positive in the sense of like what you were saying was positive, but I mean, it showed to me, kind of where I want Canada to be, and I don't want to make that sound like it's like I'm pandering or I'm like, oh, you guys are so great. But I think the expectations you guys had and the way you were measuring your team and the way you assessed how they played against a really good Dutch team who has shown themselves to be one of the most well set up teams in this tournament, led by a legendary manager in Louis van Gaal. I really thought you guys came at it bluntly, but also with an eye towards what's coming next. And I think for me, the most fascinating part is what is coming next, because the Berhalter question, it sounds most likely that he won't be around, that he wants to be a club manager, and he probably could get a job in Europe and most likely will, because he's made a lot of connections and knows a lot of people through his travels of managing the US, and he'll be fine. But as for the team itself, a lot of these guys will be in the next World Cup, but there is no real striker option, and the lack of goals, 3 goals in 4 games, seem to be an issue. How do they figure this out? Because I think one of the cooler parts is that 4 years from now, there'll be people we didn't think of emerging on the scene, but this isn't like a development thing, right? This is a cycle thing where you just don't have those horses up there right now, whereas almost everywhere else in this team, you kind of do. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think one is it's the hardest thing to generate, right? How many countries at this tournament have a number 9 who can finish and do anything else well, right? It's still one of the toughest things to generate. Some teams just don't even use them. Germany won a World Cup without literally having one because they were like, we can't figure that part out. And France's number 9 didn't score a goal when they won the World Cup. So like, but it's not an easy thing to do. By the way,
they still haven't. Germany still hasn't.
Right.
By the way.
Yeah, outside of Miroslav Klose, who's Polish, they still haven't created a number 9. You're right. So I think that's part of it. I'd also say it's Ricardo Pepi if you want to get super simple. He's 19. He got sold for $20 million. He scored 10 goals in the Eredivisie this year. I called him 4 years ago or 3 years ago, the first time I saw him in person. I said he's the best natural finisher I've ever seen in the US, and I still feel that way. But the thing you finished on is the reason that, one, I think for me, I was trying to be level-headed coming out of the result, and 2, I think is a pretty big miss for most people, which is just, I promise you don't know the names of the stars of the 2026 World Cup for the US. Like, I feel so strongly that the pipeline and the environment that's been built is so large and is already, it has been established at a level that it could be anyone, and that there will be players who come through it, but you cannot guarantee anymore. It's not just, who are the 5 guys on the U17 team? Will they make it? And okay, here's the team. Can we improve left back? Who are the next few left backs? Like, I promise you, we weren't talking in 2018 at the World Cup about Brendan Aronson. We weren't talking about Tyler Adams. We weren't talking about a lot of these guys. that are there now. And on top of that, there'll be other players who improve and get better and change, right? There'll be the Kamal Millers of the world and the Richie Lareas of the world who go through college and find their feet at the professional ranks. And there'll be players who, still do the Atiba, which is go to Europe on their own as young players and find their feet. And that's sort of how their career generates. Like, I feel so strongly that we don't know so much of this that it's surprising to me that everyone speaks in such, definitive statements about all of this.
4 years is a long time, but it's not long at all, really. Like, that's the part that I think is maybe the most jarring when you really sit back and think about it. And it's actually really exciting that is wholly true, what you just said, David, the fact that we don't know a lot of the stars that will be at that tournament just yet. And, well, I mean, it didn't feel like that was the thing at all, really. I mean, Canada is one thing, but I think the States in general, for example, it felt like whenever there was a qualification failure and we looked to what's next, the cupboard didn't feel that full at all. And I think now the cupboard it's not only full, but it's like a challenge to find all the stuff you put in there because you jammed it full of stuff, and you got to be kind of diligent and smart about how you unpack things and make sure you can account for everything because you might miss something that you put in there. And that's kind of where we are with the States, at least.
And I think that's why I think, to me, I love covering the youth game and I love covering the players who are pushing into the first team, right? Obviously, it's important to me because I believe in those players getting opportunities because I know they're good enough to challenge at the highest level if given that chance. But as much as I'm excited when I watch a Jack McGlynn or an Aiden Morris dominate an MLS Cup game, right? Or the first time you see Fonzie in a Canadian Championship game, these careers are so tough to track, right? They're not linear. There's ups and downs. There's players you don't expect to emerge for certain reasons. There's players you do expect where things go wrong. And that's why I think it's tough for people to sort of lock in on one or two names. But at the same time, I just named Jack McGlynn and Aiden Morris, who both started an MLS Cup at their ages, right? As teenagers. Right. Aiden Morris was arguably the best player on the field. Jack McGlynn's on-off numbers, I have a friend sending them to me every week in MLS because he kept saying to me, how is this guy not already on the national team? This is not a good player. We're looking at a player who is outside of the norm of what a player is capable of doing to affect a team. And I think a lot of that was game states, but still. And that's just two names. And again, we're talking about MLS Next having expanded the player pool massively because it's not just the pro clubs that are now in that. It's all of the other clubs in the US and Canada that feed into that. Then you add in the CPL, you add in MLS Next Pro, you add in the USL, you add the additions in MLS. So now there's more spots and more opportunity for all of these players. And then you add the now acknowledgement from other countries that the players that are built here are good. And now you have more players who are going to Europe at a higher level that are more prepared to be there. And so there's just so much talent. Now, what we're talking about has never happened before. Like Portugal and Belgium are the two conversations where national teams went from outside the powers to inside. And they're both countries that have EU passports and play in Champions League, year in and year out. So what the US and Canada is trying to accomplish, similar to what Japan's trying to do, similar to what Australia is slightly trying to do. And you could put Ecuador and Colombia in that convo and Mexico as well. There's no precedent to it. So I can't guarantee that it will work the way we want it to, or it will have the success we want it to. But I think pretty early on, we can see how far it's come.
You mentioned Mexico. I mean, we're talking about optimism and the vibes feeling relatively good, even though it was a round of 16 disappointment. I don't think we can say the same for Mexico, who seem to be having that referendum that we have in Canada every time the hockey team loses too early in the tournament. It doesn't sound like things are well, David. I saw some quotes. I think it's John Arnold who has that great La Liga or Liga MX newsletter. I was reading one of his recent dispatches. And the people basically calling out the system is like your mom, your brother, but like a president of a club and then like the vice president. So you're having all these different opinions in there. But it does seem like, I don't want to say rest on their laurels, but they let things slip. They play old guys in their clubs. The youth movement isn't really there. Like you see what they're doing in MLS and it's kind of non-existent in Mexico in terms of getting young players minutes and seeing the development of the youth. They just relied on veterans and then the youngsters weren't ready and we get situations like we had in Qatar.
Yeah, I think for anyone, John Arnold's, by the way, great source if you want to follow CONCACAF and follow Liga MX. I would advise to go out and sort of read a lot of the people who cover that league pretty consistently. I would say the biggest issue for Mexico is the money. There's so much money in the game, and the people who are making that money are making sporting decisions as well. And that has been a failure. So for example, Luis Chavez scores the free kick goal. That's his 4th ever cap. Maybe his 10th, whatever it was. He made his debut this year in the national team because Ache and Guardado sell tickets, and that's who the FMF and the organizations around them that have influence, because if you don't know, every single club has a seat at the table as an equal voter for the Mexican Football Federation. Those clubs are mainly owned by the massive TV companies, and so that's sort of the like round cycle that they live in. Like Chicharito did things wrong. That's why he's not in the team. But most people feel strongly the reason he's not in the team is because he was willing to speak out against the FMF. And they were like, well, then he's done. Don't call him in. And that's where you sort of wonder what Tata's autonomy was a lot of this World Cup cycle.
Right.
So there are massive problems that are systemic in Mexico, probably larger than soccer, right? A lot of the things we're talking about are cultural in a negative way that are larger than the sport. The question is, I think, not the question. The thing for Mexico was you had the culture, the population, and the infrastructure to always compete. Like Uribe Peralta did not make his debut until after he was an overage Olympic player. He proceeded to be the best striker for them for years. That was a player who followed the path that a lot of these players have, which is breakthrough at 25 and 26. And then a lot of these players become big stars and they hang on to them too long. And so for Mexico, there's huge question marks. I think the floor for Mexico will always be really high because Liga MX is such a good league and is so large, and the population pool is so large. And now you add on, as you said, the US and MLS developing at a better level. That's a lot of dual nationals who can play for Mexico as well. And I know they're recruiting heavily in the US. They have full-time scouts who live in the US and constantly recruiting those players. But for Mexico, it is worrying. Like, you look at the players left off this roster, the players people are yelling about, Diego Lainez, Santiago Jimenez. Santi Jimenez has less goals than Ricardo Pepi in the Eredivisie. That's the player they're complaining about being left off, right? And then Diego Lainez does not start for Braga, not Benfica, not Porto, Braga. Like, those are not players that elevate this national team. That's nitpicking when the bigger picture is so much worse.
Costa Rica's golden generation ending with a flourish. I would say things could only get better after the 7-0 drubbing at the hands of Spain. And they did. They literally beat Japan and then gave us one of the great joys for at least a few minutes by playing a part in possibly eliminating 3 minutes. Hey, for 3 minutes, they had us believing that Spain and Germany would be eliminated on the same day. But big transition for these guys, David. And I mean, we're talking about Mexico kind of picking up the pieces and how do they move on from here. But I mean, Costa Rica, again, a heavily domestic team, and they have some interesting players. Jewis and Benete looked really good in glimpses, but Joel Campbell and Venegas and Boston and these guys will not be around for the next go of it. Is the next crop promising, or are we looking at a bit of a time to rebuild?
No, I'm excited for Costa Rica. They left the golden generation there too long. They didn't give enough players an opportunity to push through, and so players weren't ready, but the young guys are very good. I think Brandon Aguilar, you mentioned Bennett, I think they're special. there's a few players, one Manfred Ogalde, who CFG bought and has put him at multiple CFG clubs. And he got in a fight with the federation and refused to get called up. And there are 2 or 3 other players like that who are special. They need to fix that, right? They need to have all their, like, Costa Rica's not good enough to have some of their best talent not be a part of their national team. But I still think the infrastructure and the core of the sport in Costa Rica is strong. And I think that this next generation of players, there are guys who are special. And that's what a team like that needs, right? You need the Bennetts and the Aguileras to be special so that you can build the structures with the Wastons and the Fullers and Calvos and Giancarlo Gonzalez. All of those guys could be who they are because Borges and Ruiz and Campbell and Navas were better than everyone else, right? They were elite talent that you could build around. I think Costa Rica has that again. They've messed up the last few years, but it seems like they've finally turned the page.
To the last 8 and the shock of the round of 16, Morocco stunning Spain.
Ashraf Hakimi, born in Madrid, born and raised in Spain. Morocco with the chance to win it and go through. Hakimi gets it done! Oh, what a moment for Morocco! Ashraf Hakimi! Morocco into the quarterfinals for the first time ever!
Ashraf Hakimi, breakout star of the tournament, did the Jalen Waddle penguin dance after that goal, bridging continents, connecting the world. Morocco, everyone's favorite team now. Incredible fan atmosphere of that game. Obviously, a bigger deal than just a game between Spain and Morocco for a lot of reasons. But the game itself, I mean, Spain passing the ball 9,000 times or completing 9,000 passes and not managing to do anything in the box felt like a throwback to a wonderful age. But first African team to make the quarters of a World Cup since 2010. First time they've reached the quarterfinals. Massive moment. We talked about them a bit on the show, David, but Romain Saiss, who doesn't play in the Prem anymore, I think he's in Turkey as well, was epically amazing in this game. Like really, really great. And I laughed at one of my last memories of him at Wolves was making just a hilarious mistake to cause a Wolves goal. And I just love how, I'm not saying that mistake encapsulates him and that defines him as a player, but I do love how it does feel like certain players get a bit of Superman in them when they put on that national team jersey and they just become what they once were, or they relive their prime, or they just boss out for 90 minutes plus. And I feel like we're getting that from quite a few Morocco players.
Yeah, definitely. It's for a player of that quality and that experience, sort of like rallying yourself to do it one more time. And with the national team at the World Cup, it's so few games, right? You're asking to do it 3, 4, 5 times rather than 32 games over the course of the season. And this game really fit Saiss's skill set, right? He can't really run that much anymore, but he reads the game well. He's strong, and he was clean on the ball, and that's why he's in the team. And he's obviously experienced, and that's why he's captain. But this game's just everything you want from the World Cup, right? It's literally regions, continents, all rooting for one team to just get over that line, and everyone, I think, feeling the emotion together around the world. And you see the celebrations in Morocco, but also in Barcelona and in Brussels and in Paris. And I think it, sort of gives you a different view on what this means and what this sport can be. And this is a Morocco team I talked about at the top, sort of what they do well, I think, and I think they can continue to do it. But I don't know, this game's just everything. I don't know who you end up rooting for in a random World Cup game when it's not Canada, but for me, it's like always the underdog pretty much and always against the European team. So Morocco's fun.
Big time. Big time. And again, to fuel my narrative that Canada was in the ultimate group, I need that Croatia-Morocco final, right? I need that. Juice that up. Phenomenal result for them. They'll get Portugal in the quarters. Portugal, big news, benching Ronaldo. His replacement, Gonzalo Ramos, just scored a hat-trick. ho-hum, no big deal. That Benfica factory, holy cow. Yeah. Enzo Fernandez, Ramos, how much cash are they going to make, man?
Yeah, and they just sold Darwin Nunez, right? And they sold João Felix for 110 before that. And I think Bobby put it together for me on Club and Country today. But basically Porto and Benfica are double every other club in terms of what they've been able to produce financially from selling players. And the gap between them and the third and fourth options are astronomical. And so it's great for Portugal. And my hope is with Ronaldo out, and hopefully at the end of this World Cup, Fernando Santos out. Although credit to him that he made the call, right? Yeah. And he set them up. Like, this can be a team that you always want to tune in to watch, which I think Spain is at. And some people won't say that about Spain. I will always. I'll watch a team pass 1,000 times in a live game any chance I get. I don't think Portugal will be that, but I'm just right. But I'm just saying, like, I think this Portugal team has so much talent that now, raised in a similar way, to see the game in a similar way, that to watch it all come together, I think is going to be must-watch stuff. And I'm hoping it'll be consistently over the next few years.
Ronaldo-wise, some rumors that he had agreed with Al Nassr of the Saudi Arabian League for $200 million a year, I believe. He's denied that. I don't really care anymore about this saga at all, and I didn't care much for the camera repeatedly panning over to see him grimace or whatever after Ramos kept scoring. I did think it was a bit funny, but this is the gift and the curse, right?
Okay, so let me say a few things. One, I agree with you. I don't care. Two, Ronaldo in Saudi Arabia sounds perfect. So let's just do that.
Go to Newcastle. Why doesn't he just go to How is he not going to Newcastle, right? Doesn't that make the most sense?
Probably because Newcastle doesn't want him. But three,
true.
I never want to defend Ronaldo, but I'm pretty sure all of the stuff today was fake. All of it was like, look at Ronaldo right after Ramos scored, which was like a video from 3 minutes later. Like, I think he was pretty okay with everything that happened, but I don't ever want to defend Ronaldo.
Some producer in the galley's like, yeah, hold this shot. We'll use it later.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
Nailed it. Yeah, nailed it.
Yeah, and he's probably, I bet you he'll factor. I mean, he's a bit old, and he probably can't play that consistently at this level, to be fair. So I don't think the benching was that surprising. And Santos was saying he's a pro and a captain, blah, blah, blah. We'll see what happens against Morocco. Enough about that, though. The remaining quarterfinals are pretty great. And if you got to pick one, and you do for the sake of this question, and you can't pick England and France, although you can. I won't do that to you. But which one? Which one are you most excited for?
So all of them, to be clear, but I actually think it will be England and France, which is funny because all the other ones have a pretty clear European team for me to root against, which makes it fun. And I want nothing more than to see Brazil versus Argentina in the semifinal. Like, that's the dream scenario. But England, France, it's two teams with a ton of talent. It's going to be a massive failure for one of them, right? Quarterfinals is not the level either of those teams expect to go out at this stage. There's the history, there's everything. And I really want to see Mbappe just annihilate the British backline.
Oof. It's so, man, if Saka starts, I have to cheer for England. This is where I sit now.
I was going to ask what
cheering mechanism I'm in. If he doesn't start, my England hatred fully turns on, and I'm like, enough with the Henderson Bellingham romance. Enough. I've seen enough. The true romance is Giroud and Mbappe. But if Saka starts, it's England all the way. It's coming home. I will pick Netherlands and Argentina because I think Argentina, they survived looking terrible against Saudi Arabia, and everything looks okay, and Messi's performing well, but I don't want to be that guy. But it was Australia, and the Dutch are a step above, and the Dutch are a team that I think will plan well for Messi, or plan as best they can, if that makes sense. So I'm curious to see what LVG has.
Yeah, and I think the Dutch set up well. They clearly are going to stay compact, crowd the middle of the field, but are dangerous in transition. And that's where no team has been that way against Argentina yet. like as well, or as much as Australia and Mexico and Poland gave Argentina a challenge, they did not attack that back line in transition. And now you look at Gakpo and Memphis being healthy, and whether it's Bergwijn or Berghaus, whoever it is, all of those guys, you look at the goals they scored against the US, like they're built for a game like this. So it really feels like this is a fun matchup, and it's going to be, can Messi pick apart the Dutch back line? And I don't know if he can. And that's what we're going to find out.
We made some picks before the tournament started. Yeah, I picked Uruguay. And never again, I thought I was smart and cool and the popular guy in the cafeteria picking Uruguay, but God, what a mistake. But I get a do-over. David, I'm curious, before I pick my new winner, are you sticking with Brazil?
Yeah, I'm sticking with Brazil, but that's pretty much all I got right.
Okay. So I'll pick England. How about that? I'll go for Sean Kay. Wow. For Sean Kay in his absence. I know he picked Argentina, but once again, I need my boy Bukayo to play a big role. It does feel, though, like Bellingham has been the best player at this tournament, and that's not the English bias, David. That's just the truth that Jude Bellingham is that guy. He's him.
I completely agree with you. What's fun about this game to me is I don't really think England have been properly challenged, right? Iran laid down for them. Wales is bad and needed to win. We played them toe-to-toe and finished 0-0, which I think is fair. But this will probably be the first time England will have to defend for a heavy amount of time. And not a ton, because France doesn't want a lot of the ball, but they want some of it. And I thought Senegal outplayed England for 45 minutes and should have been ahead. Rather, they were down 2-0 and Pickford makes a huge save. But we have not seen this England team in this World Cup so far, I think, play even close to a caliber of a France. And so this one's a bit of an unknown to me, which I think is fun. Like England could react to that really well. It could fit their game style even better, or they could be completely unprepared for that moment. And I think we've seen other teams that have sort of been blooded a bit already, right? Argentina lost. They've been pushed. I think the Dutch playing Ecuador and Senegal in the group was pretty tough. And so they've been challenged a bit. Portugal, I think, have been challenged a bit. Morocco, clearly. But it feels like this England team, this is their first big test.
Can't wait for these games. They start on Friday. Should be really exciting. When we come back to wrap up this week's show, it's the mailbag, Ask AFP. Welcome back to AFP. Before we close off this week's episode, a reminder that we are on patreon.com, David. The World Cup, obviously, a good time for the footy diehard, but even better for the footy diehard is our Discord chat.
Absolutely. Everyone always digging in on all the different soccer stories. We've had people in the Discord chatting about the release of the new women's league, a bunch of transfer rumors that we've seen, obviously when the Wilfried Nancy news dropped. So it's a great place to just talk about all those things as they're happening. And it'll keep you informed as well.
So if you want to join the Patreon family, the AFP family, head on over to patreon.com/a football podcast and support us today. David, no Sean, so I'm going to ask you to open up the mailbag.
Oh, wow. All right. Let's jump into Ask AFP. Let's start with Patrick in the Discord, who said non-World Cup related, but when should we start to panic about TFC's quiet offseason? The team has needs all over the pitch, and they've only acquired a backup keeper so far.
I share PB's concerns in some regards. I will say it does seem like it's been a lot of outgoings, if anything, from the league so far, David, right? Like we haven't seen a lot of that intra-league movement just yet, and I'm guessing the World Cup has a part to play in that. So I expect business to pick up quite heavily when this is done.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And my guess would be Bob Bradley knows the players he wants, and they'll get there at some point, right? This is not a team that's really worried about spending money or finding assets to pick up players, but they also did a lot of work last year. They brought in all the DPs. They brought in Mark-Anthony Kaye. So like it doesn't feel, while there is holes, a lot of the work's already been done for TFC. Let's jump to this one from S. McGinnis, who basically off the back of Wilfred Nancy getting hired in Columbus, asked the question that we've all been wondering. Would any TFC fan consider Columbus a rivalry? Devang, I ask you, is the Trillium Cup still alive?
It's alive to me, God damn it. I think I might be the only person in the world. I have a photo of me and the Trillium Cup that I cherish dearly in the locker room after we won it, one tournament. It's good. It's funny because I think there was more animosity between the fans, at least. And I know TFC supporters have had a couple of rough trips to Columbus back in the day that I think really made the rivalry a bit more, not violent, but like serious, I guess. And one of them included that game where the scoreboard lit on fire, which I remember vividly as well. But now Cincinnati came in, and then we had Montreal. And when Montreal came, we didn't really need Columbus anymore. And they don't need us with Cincinnati. And that rival, hell is real, is quite cool and fun to follow. So I don't really consider it that much of a rivalry anymore, except for the fact that they have a lot of TSC folks leading the way over there, and they seem to be doing a great job. So maybe jealousy is what I would say, not rivalry.
Yeah, that could be one. I don't think Wilfred Nancy will spark that, though, right?
No, I agree. I think it remains a team that we have some history with, but realistically, and I think I saw this in the Discord as well, all of the playoff stuff really didn't happen against them, right? It was your New York Cities and your Montreals and even your Red Bulls. So that's really where these hatreds develop, I think.
Let me hit you on this one. Steve asks, and I sort of weighed in on this in the open, so I'm curious what you say. Would you rather see the full-blown Women's Canadian League, or would you rather the NWSL sides adding a few Canadian sides?
Having some time to think about it, it really depends now what the other big players, quote unquote, do in this space. Like if MLSC is like, well, we're going to support the Women's League here and we'll be on board to back them in financial ways, but we want to get an NWSL team in here sooner than later, and we want to add to our portfolio. We think we can do both adequately, and financially we have the means. I wouldn't be against that by any means. I am worried, though, that some choices will be made in this regard, and it probably will be one or the other. And I think they could coexist, but the way I look at it, making sure this league is a success in 2025 is where most of the attention and fun should be driven to, and that includes TFC and Montreal joining up with this league, or at least backing the teams that do join them in their region. So I'll say standalone league.
Okay. And final one here, Mel S. brought this up in the Discord, basically on the back of all of these CF Montreal rumors, and saying it's great Canadians are getting looks and going to big clubs around the world. Wondering, though, if it's best if they went to places where they got more playing time and not just sit on the bench. Do you agree with this sentiment? Do you have any worries or any specific things you want to see Canadians abroad doing?
I use one specific example as my test case here, but do you think Kyle Aaron was fully ready for this World Cup?
Probably not.
Right. And I know he was beginning to get more playing time, but playing time was hard to come by at the beginning. And I think what we had surmised during that transfer process was, well, if wherever he goes, playing is a really important aspect of this. And I don't think we saw him play as much as we wanted to. And I'm not saying that's the reason. Maybe he wasn't at full flight in Qatar, but I think it might have contributed to that. Obviously, we have a lot more runway between now and 2026, but I would hope that the conversations they're having between the representatives in these clubs involve these discussions. I know nothing can be promised, but I kind of see that example as maybe a warning sign.
Now, I will say this. Kyle Aaron was not ready when he went to Besiktas, and it ended really well for him. So I agree with what you're saying. Not all of them are obvious, but finding the right fit makes sense.
Makes a lot of sense. And like we said, I think the next few weeks and months will be very fascinating because I don't think those players that have already made their moves will be alone. And we'll see maybe players of a different profile in the Canadian setup also making moves who also have different goals and different things they're looking at. Like I think Kamal Miller might be looking at a different situation or different expectations for himself than an Ishmael Kone who's making this move, right? So it'll be fascinating to see.
You also have to now to sort of figure out, and it'll be on sort of the clubs and players, but people are going to come looking for the next Ishmael Kone before they have to pay $8 million.
Yeah.
And so now's the time where the Jaden Nelsons and the Luca Petrasos and the Karifa Yaos and, Baldissimos and players like that, they're going to get some interest as well. And the clubs have to make sure that they're able to place them at the right spots, because those moves for clubs, the value is the sell on. And that's what happened for the Philadelphia Union, and that's what happened for FC Dallas, right? The Union made their Brendan Aronson money off the second move, as well as the first move. Now they're placing Paxton Aronson. So that's one of the things that's going to be interesting to watch, because I agree with you. Kamal Miller's probably in a different space, and Joel Waterman's a different space. But now even the next group, like just someone come in and just offer money for Rita Zuhir right now so that they save the money they would have to spend for when he's at Ishmael Kone's level, if he ever gets there.
Can't wait. Fascinating stuff. We'll have plenty more World Cup discussion as we get into the semifinals next week, but that's all we have for today. We hope you enjoyed this week's episode, and if you did, a rating or review of this podcast would be incredible for us. Plus, hit us up on Twitter at @afootballpod, and of course, patreon.com/afootballpodcast. Big thanks to producers Dylan and Zach on the ones and twos, and of course for David. Thank you so much for listening to AFP. We'll talk to you next week.